Hello, my name's Angus McLEOD and this is the first of a series of videos called Tips for Managers, and it's the motivation series of which this of course is the first. So this first in the series really is if you like an introduction, and I think if we're talking about motivation, one of the key elements we really ought to be considering is about knowing the people who we want to influence. So in terms of motivation, we're not necessarily just talking about the people who work for us. What we should be thinking about is the stakeholders, all those people around us who support us in achieving what we need to achieve for ourselves and for our organisations. Fact is that most of us are very busy. And in being busy, we're not necessarily knowing enough about the people who work for us. And very often, and it's a very human thing to do, we place people in boxes and we see them as the person who gets things done, or the person who's a bit slow, or the person who's methodical, gets things done, but in a longer term basis we tend to pigeonhole people. But we may not really understand their motivations. We may also think that people's motivations are very similar to ours, but it might be that it's about achievement or it's about money. Well, which is it? Is it one of those or the other? Or is it something else? People are very, very different, and their motivations are different, and the fastest way of getting to understand people is to listen to them. Now that does mean taking some time out to do it, but this of course can be highly productive and a cost-effective use of your time in getting to know people. Now that involves conversations, one-to-ones, privately or informally. Both of those are important, not just one. We shouldn't just be doing informal one-to-ones, we shouldn't just be doing formal one-to-ones. What we need to be doing is both of those. And what we're trying to do is to get a picture of what it is that motivates people. So we should be asking questions. Another way to do that, particularly with new staff rather than the people who've been around us for a long time, is to think about using the wheel of work. Well, what is that? It's a wheel with 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 different subjects in the segments of that wheel. And it provides us then with a format that we can use to find out where an individual is at the moment in terms of those factors. So the factors might, for example, be career progression, they might be relationships at work, for example, they might be work-life balance. And the concept then is to ask them to start wherever they like. Now what we're doing there is to make sure we're on an equal footing with them. We don't need to say, well, I'm a manager, I'm a director, you go and sit down over there behind the other side of this desk. They know who we are, we know what our status is, they know what our status is. So all we need to do is, in this context, is to give them the freedom to open up. And we do that by just being a human being, sitting and asking questions. So we'll be asking questions on the wheel of work. Where would you like to start? You might say, well, work-life balance isn't too good at the moment, I'd like to start there. So what we do is offer them the possibility of maybe scoring 0 to 10. What is their contentment level for that work-life balance at the moment? Now you might get 1 score, you might get a range. They might say sometimes we've got projects running and it's very bad, sometimes it's okay and it's a higher number. But ask them if they'd like to set that down on the wheel or whether you can do it for them. Give them the choice. This is again about an egalitarian space for the moment, so that we're trying to open up the conversation and understand more about them. Now what most people do is to go around the whole wheel, maybe picking up the segments which they feel more confident about first, and then as they get more confident and more relaxed, moving to the ones that perhaps they're trying to put off to a little bit later on. When that's all done, there's another set of questions then about, well, where would they like it to be 0 to 10? So the work-life balance might, let's say, be 4, and they might like to push it to, say, 6 on a realistic basis over the period of the next maybe 3 or 6 months. And that's a question you might want to ask them. So over what time period, and what would be a realistic change that you might make over that period. Now having done all that, you've then got a whole series of measures of where they are now, where they'd like to be, and over what time spans they would like those changes to take place. It gives you a good idea of where some of their demotivations are, and it may well already have given you some very good ideas about where some of their motivations are as well. Both of those are important. Now what do we have to do? We can look to gap managing. Now we're not going to manage for them, we want them to manage themselves. What's the point of that? Well, if I was to tell you what to do, you'd probably say go and take a hike. You know, why should I listen to you? You probably want to make your own decisions and do things in your own way. And that's entirely right. That gives us our management style, and we shouldn't be messing with that. What we're looking for is to just enhance those skills and abilities, that knowledge, that capability to change and be flexible and move things on, and to be successful and self-motivated. So ask questions, get them to gap manage themselves. So how would you get from level 4 to 6 over 6 months? What would need to change? How can I help with that? You can go around the whole thing, but what tends to happen is if you ask the question, so if one or two of these is most important, of those 8 or 10 sectors, which one or two are the most important and would have the greatest influence? They then identify 1, 2 or 3 segments typically, which will have a major impact on many of the others. So we don't necessarily have to do the whole wheel. But as you can see already, you're learning a lot more about the motivations of people. Once you understand those motivations of the individuals who work for you, of course, you can respond to that and get more out of people. And of course, not only will they be more productive, but they will have a more sustainable work life. In other words, they can continue to perform and have well-being as well in the context of their work. That's important too. Not only will they be more productive, but they will have a more sustainable work life. In other words, they can continue to perform and have well-being as well in the context of their work. That's important too. Now, a lot of those conversation, the wheel of work, is applied to perhaps fairly new staff, but of course once you get confident with it, it's possible to say, oh, you know, a number of the managers here are using the wheel of work. We've had a couple of one-to-ones, but I'd like to use this tool, as I have been with others, to have a conversation with you. Is that okay? And you give them the wheel of work. And the great advantage of this, in applying it to people who've been around longer, is that you get to know a lot more about them and their motivations. But also, it's not eyeball to eyeball, because suddenly you've got a piece of paper with you. You're both looking at the piece of paper rather than looking at one another. And that makes it a much more relaxed and easy way to deal with the one-to-one. Now, none of that deals with our peer group, doesn't deal with our bosses. And later on in these series of motivation series, in the Tips for Managers series, we'll be looking also at peer groups and other stakeholders, for example, people who manage us and direct us, and perhaps shareholders and others who may be important to us and how we might influence them.